Okay, beautiful Sunday morning, if it doesn't rain too hard. And today we're going to talk about being out of time. And just out of interest, there's in Tel Aviv, there's a pride parade going on right now, I guess. And there's 250,000 people on the streets. This is in Israel, Tel Aviv. 250,000 men kissing men, girls kissing girls, and playing with themselves in the streets.
Evet. Bazı eşcinseller I love sex ha. Bazı eşcinseller erkek abi ama kadın gibi. Kadından daha güzel olanları var. Az önce birini gördüm. Samimi söylüyorum kadından daha.
And exposing all their flesh in Tel Aviv. 250,000 people. In Israel, in God's land. But then, of course, in, I think it's Revelation 11. Revelation 11, it talks about the two witnesses, and it says there, and their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So Israel's actually called Sodom, spiritually. And at the end times, we'll see everything that happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, you're going to see happening in Israel.
Zaten insanlara da bakalım. Evet, kamyonumuz geliyor. Kamyonda kamyon.
And that's why God's going to burn up most of the people that are there. So, well, all over the world these things are going on, of course. But anyhow, we're out of time. Out of time. Well, there's this old series on television, and it was called The Twilight Zone. We used to sit around as kids around the little television and watch this.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone. Now, there was one episode, and a man was classified obsolete and ordered put to death. This is an old black and white film. And he was ordered put to death because he believed truth in books. He was a librarian.
Wordsworth, Romney, obsolescence.
You walk into this room at your own risk, because it leads to the future. Not a future that will be, but one that might be. This is not a new world. It is simply an extension of what began in the old one. It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time. It has refinements, technological advances, and a more sophisticated approach to the destruction of human freedom. But like every one of the super-states that preceded it, it has one iron rule. Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace. This is Mr. Romney Wordsworth. In his last 48 hours on Earth, he's a citizen of the state, but will soon have to be eliminated. Because he is built out of flesh, and because he has a mind.
You You've been under investigation, Mr. Wordsworth, for the mandatory period of 1 year and 11 months. You're found to be obsolete. The purpose of this hearing is to make a finding in the matter and make a sentence accordingly. Do you understand that, Mr. Wordsworth? Your occupation, Mr. Wordsworth?
And back then, books were, well, in this futuristic event, books were not allowed, and you had to only listen to the government. And they actually executed this man because he believed from truth in the books.
A librarian.
A librarian. Having to do with books.
Just like this book of truth. And soon we're going to see this outlawed, the people that are left behind.
Yes, sir. Books.
Since there are no more books, Mr. Wordsworth, there are no more libraries. The field investigators in your sector have classified you as obsolete. Your rights are as follows, Mr. Wordsworth. You are to be liquidated within a period of 48 hours. You are obsolete, Mr. Wordsworth.
A lie. No man is obsolete.
You have no function, Mr. Wordsworth. You're an anachronism, like a ghost from another time.
I am nothing more than a reminder to you that you cannot destroy truth by burning pages.
You're a bug, Mr. Wordsworth, a crawling insect, an ugly, misformed little creature who has no purpose here, no meaning.
I am a human being.
Delusions, Mr. Wordsworth. Delusions that you inject into your veins with printer's ink. The narcotics that you call literature, poetry, essays of all kind, all of it an opiate. You have nothing but spindly limbs and a dream, and the state has no use for your kind.
I don't care. I tell you, I don't care. I'm a human being. I exist. And if I speak one thought aloud, that thought lives, even after I'm shoveled into my grave.
The Chancellor, the late Chancellor, was only partly correct. He was obsolete. But so is the state, the entity he worshipped.
You're going to see it outlawed. And some of us here may actually see that too. Many believers that miss the rapture are going to also be put to death and beheaded for this book. Just like that future. And that was back in the 60s on television that we watched as kids. This futuristic event that's actually coming to reality right now. But anyhow, let's look in the scriptures how God moves himself and men in and out of time. We're going to talk about time travel today. We're going to talk about it because it really happens and it really can happen. And it's going to happen. And you're going to see it. So, well, some of us here will see it. Maybe we all will. This depends how long we're here. But let's look at the scriptures now. And you have Enoch and Elijah. They were both transported to heaven at a time. So that's our first two clues. And the Enoch one is in Genesis 5. Go to Genesis 5 and you'll see what happened with Enoch. Genesis, how God took him at a time. Genesis 5. And start in verse 23. And the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Yeah, Enoch walked with God. He was so faithful to whatever words God had in God that God just took him. God just took him back then. So it's kind of like a preview of how he's going to take his true believers up at the end too. And then in second, let's go to Elijah now. Now God said he would take Elijah. He said, and everyone knew that. Elijah's servant, knew that God was going to take Elijah. And Elijah said to Elisha, he said, is there anything you want me to leave you with, basically? And Elisha says, yeah, I would like a double portion. I would like your mantle and a double portion of what you have. And Elijah fulfilled that promise to Elisha. But that's in 2 Kings 2:11. 2 Kings, that's just about 8 books over here. 2 Kings 2:11. We're not going to talk about the double portion today because that's another study. 2 Kings 2:11. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked. Now this is Elijah and Elijah, right? That behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Now, whirlwind's another study. There's lots of whirlwinds that actually God comes in a whirlwind. He takes people up in a whirlwind. So don't be surprised if there's some big tornado or something when people disappear. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I'm not saying that as doctrine, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. So then we're going to see what Jeremiah had to have done some time travel, because Jeremiah was in and out of time as God knew him before. God knew him before he was born. And you'll see that in Jeremiah 1, the book of Jeremiah 1. I guess we're kind of going to be going out of time back 2,000 years when we go into the wilderness here soon. It's going to be kind of cool. Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. So before Jeremiah was even formed, God doesn't only know you in the stomach, in the womb. We know that because John the Baptist leaped in the womb. And before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. And I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. So God knew Jeremiah before he was formed in the womb? Yes. Yes, absolutely. So, and then we have Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene, and I think we did a study a few weeks ago about Mary Magdalene not being able to touch Jesus. Mary Magdalene couldn't touch Jesus because he had not gone up to heaven yet. Jesus said, touch me not. But that same day, many people touched him. Now how's that possible? Because no one was allowed to touch Jesus because he hadn't ascended to the Father yet. But that same day, many people touched him. Jesus went in and out of time. Out and back into time. And we're going to see that here in John, the book of John. That very same day went in and out of time to ascend to the Father. Book of John 20. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John 20. And verse 16. Start in verse 16. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself and said unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren, and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Then that same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, read carefully, when the doors were shut. Why were the doors shut? Where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews. They were worried the Jews would come in and kill them. They didn't only have those doors shut, they had them sealed, probably barricaded. Came Jesus and stood in the midst and said unto them, Peace be unto you. How did Jesus get in that room? Yeah, he traveled in and out of time. Went out and back into time. Or, of course, he could have just, walked right through the door. Without the door, like his body just changed its molecular structure and just walked through the door. But I believe he went in and out of time. Then in verse 26, and after 8 days again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. And then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace be unto you. He walked through time again. Then saith he to Thomas, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side. And be not faithless, but believing. That same day, everybody could touch him. Jesus said, come and touch me. Touch me. Touch me. Now, there was another series we watched as children. We were all huddled around this little black and white television set, and it was called The Invisible Man. I think there's been there might even be a new movie today about the Invisible Man. I don't know, I haven't followed up on it. But there was one series in particular. A scientist had an accident using plutonium. That's how the Invisible Man was apparently manifested. And he using plutonium, and he could walk right through doors, and he could put his hands into things and really weird stuff. But towards the end of this series, he had to have every time he did something, walk through a wall or a door or something, he would get very old. His body would get very old, and he'd have to actually touch another living being to regain his youth and actually kill that person. They would turn into an old person. So it's really weird where they got this spirit from. And here, you see Jesus walking through doors and stuff. Or in and out of time. Well, where did Hollywood get that spirit from? But do we really have the authority over time travel? We, as believers, do we have that authority over time travel? Yeah, if you got faith in Jesus Christ, absolutely. And you're going to see it here. That's in the book of James. In the book of James, first we're going to go to James and look at something about wisdom here. Go to James, and then we're going to show you. James 1, verse 5 and 6. If any, remember what was said about faith here, up above? If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. All you got to do is ask God, he'll give you all the wisdom you want. Look at Solomon. That's the only thing he asked for. Yeah. And he ended up with everything. The richest man in the world. But let him ask in faith. You see that? In faith, not wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. So you better believe every word of this book if you ask God something. You believe in complete faith. Trust every word of this book. So who in the Bible trusted the Lord so much without wavering that he was able to actually send a man through time? Who did that? The prophet Isaiah. Yeah, God gave him that authority. Well, actually, God did it, but the prophet Isaiah sent Hezekiah on a time trip. Yeah, a time trip, because Hezekiah was having some doubts, and he said, Hezekiah being a Jew said, give me a sign. And Isaiah sent him through time. And we're going to look at that here in 2 Kings. Go to the book of 2 Kings. And we'll be able to do this, because we'll be able to do everything Christ did and more. The Bible promises us that when he was on earth. We won't be creating the heavens and the earth, but we'll be able to do everything that Jesus did when he was on earth and more. And there's just a prophet of Jesus, what a prophet was doing. 2 Kings 20. We're going to go to 2 Kings 20. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. This man was laying on a bed. He had this horrible boil. Laying on a bed, sick unto death from a boil back then. If you didn't have medication for a boil, you were dead. And the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, came to him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. Then, this is Hezekiah, of course. He turned his face to the wall and prayed unto the Lord, saying, I beseech thee, O Lord, remember now how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart, and done that which is good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept sore. And it came to pass, afore Isaiah was gone out of the middle court, that the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Turn again, and tell Hezekiah, the captain of my people, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David, thy father, I have heard thy prayer, I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. On the third day thou shalt go up unto the house of the Lord. What did God just say there? I have seen thy tears. He cried out to the Lord, called out to the name of the Lord, Hezekiah. And that's what we got to do. Call out to the name of the Lord. And verse 6, and I will add unto thy days 15 years. So that's like you're going to die. Is your time up? And everyone's appointed wants to die, and you're going to die in 2010? And God says, hey, I'm going to let you live 2025. Wow, cool. And I will deliver thee and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria. And I will defend this city for mine own sake, and for my servant's David's sake. And Isaiah said, Take a lump of figs. And they took and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. So they used figs to treat a boil in. But they didn't know that. God showed them that. Put figs on a boil, and it heals.
You want me to elevate her head? If anything. Where's the police?
Sure, you can use this.
I don't know. He's the nurse.
Whatever you need.
Somebody can help direct traffic.
The guy blocked it off. He blocked out with his car.
It says on the monitor!
Mary, can you hear me?
Check her pulse.
Nothing.
Charging at 200.
Clear.
Go, go. Go again.
Charging at 300. Clear. We got her. She's back.
You're not gonna die. We're not gonna let that happen. Watch that monitor.
And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. And the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it. And death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every man according to their works. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire.